My name is Kasey Wells, and I have a story to share. I call it The Story of Tidbit. In it, I attempt to bridge the gap between science and God. I have some new ideas, and I incorporate some old ideas to explain the origins and evolution of the universe. I dedicate this story to all those who believe in equality, and to all those who seek to restore balance to our broken political, economic, and ecologic systems. And for all those who believe, let this symbol prevail. For all those who do not, well, this isn't for sale. The story of Tidbit was composed around the observance of the power of three. Such topics to be discussed: the three prerequisite beliefs in order to accept and enjoy the story of Tidbit are a belief in God, a belief in evolution, and a belief that the universe had a beginning. Well, I just wanted to say, I was raised a Christian. In high school, I became an atheist. In college, I wrote a persuasive speech on how God didn't exist. And during that process, I had a breakdown and realized there's no way I could be so pompous to declare such. And at that point, I became agnostic, believing that, well, if there might be a God, but I wasn't for sure what God was yet. But I didn't want to say there wasn't because I wasn't sure. And then throughout college, I studied art, but as a child, I always wanted to be an astronaut. And I was fascinated by physics and by, cosmology, or just the cosmos. And I've always been interested in studying science, and for a long time I was of the belief that science would one day be able to explain everything in a logical or fundamental way. But as I thought more and more about it, there were three questions I came up with that I discovered or decided or thought that science would never be able to answer. And those three questions were: where did one come from? What brought two together? And how did life originate? And so, since there is no way science, in my mind, will ever be able to answer these three questions, I have to attribute them to acts of God. First act of God, God brought one, the introduction of the first bit of matter. Second act of God, God brought two together, the initiation of gravitational attraction. Third act of God, God brought life, the inception of the first bit of life, a single-celled bit of life with the ability of self-replication. So, every action has a reaction. Here are the three reactions to those three acts of God, equaling three types of matter. The first reaction would be infinite neutrality, or the introduction of all dark matter. The second reaction being perpetual duality, or the evolution of all luminous matter. And the third reaction, the evolution of life, or the evolution of all organic matter. And the most important part of the power of three, or structurally important to the story of Tidbit, are the three basic building blocks or charges within matter. There are neutral, positive, and negative charges, and within matter there are neutrons, protons, and electrons. Every story has a beginning. This story starts before the beginning. Before the beginning of all beginnings. Before matter ever came into existence. And so begins the story of Tidbit. Before the beginning, everything was equal, infinite and equal. Before positive, before proton, before negative, before electron, everything in existence was neutral, infinitely neutral. Before positive and negative, there is nothing in opposition, nothing in competition, no friction, no resistance, no duality, no distance, no space, no sound, no light, no time. Before the beginning, the intangible three were God, the infinite, and neutrality. What is God? The inexplicable force that made the impossible possible. What is the infinite? The boundless, empty realm of eternal darkness. What is neutrality or neutral? A particle of neutral or no charge. So what was the first act of God? The creation of something out of nothing. The introduction of one, or the first bit of matter. What was the first something? One neutrally charged particle. So what was the first act of God? The inexplicable force that introduced the first neutral particle to the infinite. So we have God, the infinite, neutral. Now we have infinite neutrality. But for every action, there's a reaction. First action, here's the first reaction. By introducing one neutrally charged particle to the infinite, God instantaneously transformed the infinite into infinite neutrality. What is infinite neutrality? The boundless realm of eternal darkness where an unlimited amount of neutrally charged particles are endlessly / omnidirectionally positioned in parallel. So why did the introduction of neutral to the infinite lead to infinite neutrality? Well, between 0 and 1, there are infinite amount of numbers in between. Think of binary code. Or, think about between 0 and 1, there's point, goes on, infinite, forever. Also, something can't exist amid the infinite without becoming infinite as well. Only particles that can be positioned perpetually parallel can exist amid the infinite. Only particles of neutral or no charge can be positioned perpetually parallel. Therefore, the first act of God, the introduction of one, God instantaneously initiated an endless array of self-replicated, neutrally charged particles. Action, reaction. Thereby making neutral infinite and the infinite neutral, i.e., infinite neutrality. However, since the first something was of neutral or no charge, the first something must also be considered nothing numerically as well. Otherwise stated, amid infinite neutrality, neutral is nothing or 0, neutral is something represents 1, and neutral also is everything. If this story is thus far fundamentally true, then the endless array of neutrally charged particles amid infinite neutrality should have remained in a static state, perpetually parallel in all directions for all eternity. No two particles amid infinite neutrality should have ever touched. Everything should have remained endlessly identical, perfectly parallel. Unless infinite neutrality was interrupted by the second act of God. So what was the second act of God? The inexplicable force that caused two neutrally charged particles amid infinite neutrality to collide, i.e., the initiation of gravitational attraction. Well, more like God spun these two particles together. Then, action. Bang, so to speak, but in 3D. The reactions of that is magnetism immediately. Magnetism could be thought of as the ongoing, reverberating, or resonant electrical effect that resulted from this first quantum collision, i.e. perpetual duality. Now we have a positive and negative that have a neutral core. There's always a positive and a negative to magnetism, or a north pole and a south pole, and there's a neutral space in the middle there somewhere, but it's infinite. You could draw a circle around it, but you can't pinpoint it exactly. Also, other reactions would be the releasing of the first flutter of light, space-time, motion, momentum, energy, radiation, radiation which caused a mutation or transformation from neutral to positive negative, i.e. matter and mass, moving from infinite neutrality to perpetual duality, or from dark matter to luminous matter, matter that reflects, radiates, or otherwise interacts with light. Hence hydrogen, the first chemical element, the first atom. And if you look at the electron wave function or orbitals within hydrogen, the pattern in which electrons orbit around protons or around a nucleus, well, you might question what keeps electrons going? Why do they keep spinning? Infinite neutrality is the answer. They are attempting to return to a neutral position. However, protons prohibit them from doing so because they carry the opposite charge, and vice versa. And so began the perpetual game of tug of war. A dualistic positive-negative atom spinning amid an infinite array matrix field of neutrally charged particles, pushing, pulling, attracting, repulsing, otherwise known as tidbit. In the beginning, there was only a tidbit. What is tidbit? Tidbit represents the first speck of polarized matter to have entered into existence within our universe, from which all other matter cyclically ascended or descended. Tidbit also represents all of the fundamental charges that exist within matter and antimatter amid our universe, positive, negative, and neutral, and the opposite thereof. Each letter in the word tidbit further illustrates this symbolic idea. So we have a tidbit of matter. T stands for positive or proton, I negative or electron, D neutral or neutron, but the DB together, you can see the infinite neutrality symbol. DB together also represent infinite neutrality and perpetual duality. On the bit side, B representing anti-neutral or anti-neutron, I anti-negative or positron, T anti-positive or anti-proton. Otherwise stated, tid represents matter, color charge or electric charge. Bit represents anti-electric charge, anti-color charge, or antimatter. And so the story goes. From out of the darkness of infinite neutrality, two charges diverged into perpetual duality. A tidbit was born, a universe took course, but all remained bound by the omnipresent force. What is the omnipresent force? It is the invisible intergalactic interaction that intertwines every single tidbit throughout our universe, otherwise known as dark matter. It is the binding force that keeps all matter tethered together like a gigantic neurological network across the cosmos. What is perpetual duality? The opposing forces of positive-negative that diverged, transformed, evolved after the first neutral-neutral impact. If a positive-negative tidbit of matter were introduced into an infinite field of neutrally charged particles, then this attractive, repulsive tidbit of matter would have pushed and pulled at the surrounding neutrally charged particles, causing an expanding succession of quantum collisions and atomic transformations, thus initiating a cyclical snowball effect, which led to the formation and evolution of the chemical elements, or otherwise stated, the evolution of all luminous matter. So what is the cyclical snowball effect? Well, simply put, is the process of atomic development that brought our universe from the first tidbit to the present. What would happen at first would be the development of hydrogen and helium. They would grow into large gas clouds that would then condense and form stars that then would go through their life cycles and explode and liquidate out all of the other chemical elements. So the cyclical snowball effect, as more matter is exposed, the faster our universe grows, i.e. dark energy. Matter plus momentum equals energy. So tidbit is matter, matter that has the three fundamental charges, within it, positive, negative, and neutral, that are in constant motion around one another. And this interaction between positive, negative, and neutral causes energy. So matter plus momentum equals energy. On the left side of this chart, you can see I've organized the forms in which matter takes. We have superfluids, plasmas, gases, liquids, and solids. In the middle of the chart, you can see the different motions or pathways or movements or the flow in which matter moves, or little tidbits of matter move, and I call it the universal methods of momentum. You can imagine these little tidbits spinning, orbiting, radiating, waving, spiraling, funneling, channeling, branching, and networking in and around magnetic fields at the speed of light through space-time, carrying with it the three fundamental charges within it, positive, negative, and neutral, and the interaction between these three fundamental charges causes the four fundamental forces: the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, electromagnetism, and gravitation. So there are three fundamental charges within matter causing four fundamental forces or interactions. Simply stated, attraction to or interaction with neutral, neutron, or the nucleus equals gravity. Keep in mind that all tidbits of matter came from neutral, therefore all tidbits of matter are attracted to neutral. Interaction between the nucleus and electron equals weak interaction, or the weak nuclear force. Interaction between neutron and proton equals the strong interaction, or the strong nuclear force. And interaction between proton and electron equals electromagnetism. And so, going even deeper into the story of tidbit, we move from the atomic level to the subatomic level, and we begin to examine the itty-bitty aspects of tidbit. Inside of protons, there are two up quarks and one down quark, and inside of neutrons, there are two down quarks and one up quark. When we look at all the other fundamental particles that make up the subatomic world, we find the same fundamental truth being expressed. That is, all fundamental particles contain either a positive, negative, or neutral charge, or the opposite thereof. You'll also find that the specific particles, the bosons, which are the force carriers or the force mediators for the fundamental interactions, well, all of these particles are also neutral. They are the particles which the other particles are attracted to or move through while interacting with gravitation, electromagnetism, the weak nuclear force, or the strong nuclear force. Therefore, once again, all matter is attracted to and or moving through a neutral position. What's also interesting to note here is that photons, which are the quantum of light, are the force carriers for electromagnetism, and photons are neutral particles, and they can travel an infinite distance. Therefore, photons are infinitely neutral, moving through infinite neutrality. So, on the left side of this chart, you have those fundamental particles that make up matter, and on the right side, you have the fundamental particles that represent antimatter, tidbit. Other than the Higgs boson, it's also important to note that all of the fundamental particles also contain spin, and this chart helps illustrate that. All of the particles in this chart are in the exact same positions as they were in the previous chart. The visual logistics and spin representation illustrated here in these subatomic particles was designed by University of Michigan professor Jan Hendrik Anderson, who in 2005 worked with other Fermilab physicists to develop the spin visualizations you see here. So in review, first act of God was the introduction of neutral, and the reaction to that would be infinite neutrality. The second act would be bringing two of those neutral particles together amid infinite neutrality. The reactions to that collision or vast, we have magnetism, i.e. perpetual duality, or a tidbit of matter with mass that is in constant motion and gaining momentum, generating energy that is radiating and reflecting light throughout space-time, carrying with it the three fundamental charges, positive, negative, and neutral, thereby generating the four fundamental forces, forming more and more tidbits and cyclically snowballing into the rest of the chemical elements. Keep in mind that infinite neutrality also represents dark matter, or potential matter. Infinite neutrality also equals dark energy, or potential energy. And as more and more matter was brought into our universe from infinite neutrality and converted into positive and negative matter from neutral, well, as more matter was brought in, the faster and faster our universe grew. Matter plus momentum equals energy. Infinite neutrality not only represents everything outside of our universe and the source of all matter within our universe, it is also the medium or the ubiquitous fluid which our universe is moving through, sort of a porous passage, if you will, meaning it is what encases or encompasses all intergalactic matter. It is what holds galaxies together. It is the majority of what our universe is made of. So if the introduction of all dark matter could be described as the reaction to the first act of God, and the evolution of all luminous matter could be described as the reaction to the second act of God, well, what was the third act of God? The inexplicable force that introduced the first single-celled, self-replicable tidbit of life into our universe, from which all other life cyclically descended. Otherwise stated, God respun X 2 and 1 with binary fission, and life had begun. So first act, remember, God brought one, or the first bit of matter. Second act, God spun two together. And then the third act of God, God brought a single-celled organism with a single strand of DNA. However, rather than spinning two together, God spun one apart to start the evolution of life. The evolution of life being the third reaction. So again, the third act of God, God brought one bit of life. And also, God spun one bit of life apart to start the evolution of life. So what is the evolution of life? Or the evolution of all organic matter? It is infinite growth potential, infinite biodiversity potential given time and hospitable conditions within a balanced ecosystem. The evolution of life, or the evolution of all organic matter. As tidbit became tidbits through self-replication, environmental radiation, chemical bonding, and/or divergent duplication caused continuous mutations, transformations, and modifications, thereby giving life infinite biodiversity potential and infinite growth potential. Just as we imagine matter moving through these universal methods of momentum, you could imagine a little single-cell bacterial cell doing the same, moving through these same common pathways and finding itself within different environments where there were different forms of radiation or sunlight and so on that caused them to alternate and become different things. So tidbit changed, genetic code rearranged, but the separation was the same within all three types of cell division. Whether we're talking about binary fission, mitosis, or meiosis, all go through the process of DNA replication, DNA mid-cell formation, and cell duplication. In order to begin the cell cycle, first a cell must replicate its DNA. After that, the DNA or chromosomes line up at the middle of the cell in different patterns depending on which type of cell division we're talking about, but the DNA always draws together in the middle of the cell, and then the DNA divides and moves towards the poles. The cell elongates and then prepares for splitting and duplicating. And the cell then separates, and you have cell duplication, two cells with the same genetic structures as the parent cell. Magnetism has perpetually propelled living cells through this process ever since the first single-cell self-replicating bit of life came into existence. And infinite neutrality is physically and symbolically represented in the middle or center or at the core of this continuous cycle. However, the magnetic fields of the cell cycle lie in the opposite position of what you might expect. Rather than having a north and south pole, the positions in which the poles are within cell division, you might say they are in an east-west position. But to better understand how magnetism plays a role in cell division, you have to overlap two magnetic fields. Because as the cell is duplicated, two magnetic fields are generated. And coincidentally or not, the cell cycle circulates in a magnetic pattern that is similar to some of the electron wave function orbitals within hydrogen. But to truly understand what makes a tidbit of life, we have to take a step back and look at DNA replication. Within DNA replication, there is polarity everywhere. There is polarity between the top replication fork and the bottom replication fork. There's polarity between the new strand and the old strand, the lagging strand and the leading strand. Each segment of the strand has directional polarity. The strand separators have polarity, as do the strand replicator enzymes and proteins. The nucleobase pairs also have polarity. It's either AT or TA or GC or CG. Positive negative or negative positive, you could also say. Perpetually spinning around a neutral axis. And so here I've illustrated how a tidbit of life is symbolically represented through DNA replication. T represents the left old strand, I represents the left new strand, D represents the top replication fork, or the strand separator and replicator enzymes and proteins. DB together, again, like a tidbit of matter, represent infinite neutrality and perpetual duality, because DNA replication is perpetually dualistic and is continuously circulating around a central or neutral axis. On the other side, B represents the bottom replication fork, or the bottom strand replicator and separator enzymes and proteins. I representing the right new strand, and T representing the right old strand. So, to sum up this story in a simple way, one thing I could say is, God spun a tidbit of matter and a tidbit of life. And if you look at the way particles, or you look at quantum physics, and you look at the structure of atoms, and get down to the smallest bits of them, you will find everything contains a positive, negative, or neutral charge, and also carries with it spin properties. The same can be found in life through DNA replication. Everything, whether we're talking about life or matter, the fundamental truth is the same. So, God spun a tidbit of matter together and a tidbit of life apart to start the evolution of all luminous matter and the evolution of all organic matter. Another way to imagine, or to sum up this entire story, would be to re-review the three acts and the three re-acts of God. The first act of God was the neutral act of God, because God brought one neutral particle to the infinite. The second act of God was the negative act of God, because negative charges are attractive, and that's what God did. God attracted two neutral particles together amid the infinite. And the third act of God was the positive act of God, because positive charges are repulsive. They push things apart, and that's what God did. God brought one and pushed one tidbit of life apart. And the first reaction being the introduction of all dark matter, or otherwise known as infinite neutrality. Second reaction being the evolution of all luminous matter, or otherwise known as perpetual duality, a positive and negative, constantly spinning around a neutral core. And the third reaction being the evolution of life, or the evolution of all organic matter. So in the end, I guess what I'm saying is, the Big Bang is wrong, because from the information I've been given or gathered, The evidence suggests that all luminous matter and all organic matter evolved and or snowballed from only a tidbit. So what is the point of this whole story? What are the morals? What can we learn from this? Well, neutral is the source from which the universe took course. Every tidbit of matter is tethered to neutral. The essence of God exists at the origins of neutral. So to be like God is to strive towards neutral, emotionally, ecologically, economically, etc. And when I say chase transcendence and achieve neutrality, I'm talking about maintaining balance in your life. We're all filled with love and hate and happy and sad feelings. We all can recognize when things are drastically out of balance within ourselves and within our environment. And it is our duty to address those imbalances and do our best to try to correct them and bring things back to neutral, to the center, to the core, where things are equal and fair and balanced. That's where transcendental moments are found, and that's when we are closest to God.